Many of us predicted this would happen during this election because of this whole national mail-in voting process we haven't used in 230 years. I mean, because of the coronavirus, which they've rebranded when it came out that there's at least 3 patents on coronavirus. Patents 7279327, 7220852, and 7776521. Oh, the press isn't going to bother with that, and fact checkers will come up with something. I'm wondering, are we going to create a fact-check certification system now? Many have heard that it's illegal to put a patent on Mother Nature. Whatever, who cares? Medicine's just big business. So big, the government wants in on it with your health care. And we all know once the government takes over something, it turns out better. Just look at Social Security, the VA, and the laundry list of things that they've took control over little by little so you won't notice. All just a coincidence. You don't notice all the medical facilities popping up all around you. Pretty soon will be nothing but national chain stores and medical buildings. Good thing we're all members of the new COVID victim group, and politicians are promising to save us and protect us from the invisible threat that we're supposed to hide from forever, because the government's good at everything. Have you ever wondered why, for the hundreds of years we've had elections, they never really pushed for voting by mail until more recently? We've had mail for over 200 years. You think there might have been a reason? I mean, the way they talk about our right to vote, they say it's more powerful than anything. But everything else that's powerful, you need to put a little effort into. Except for this, of course. Getting a driver's license, getting a firearm. You don't even need an ID to vote. That's weird. That must be because of racism. But they say ID requirements is racist. Vote.org is mass mailing people saying the delays in the election are from the coronavirus. Of course they are, which is why the rest of the country is done with their tallies. And the recent video showing a news broadcast and the ballot processor in the background erasing something on a ballot and filling something else in, I'm sure the fact checkers are moving swift to come up with some excuse to justify or discredit that. It's what they do. I mean, it's all to save our democracy. Could this have been planned before the virus? Anyone with an inch of common sense saw this ballot stuff happening when a certain political party pushed so hard for this mail-in voting process we haven't used in 230 years. And because of this new process that opens up bigger problems and greater opportunities for fraud and cheating, anyone who opposes this must want to stop people from voting. We can stand in long lines waiting to drop off our ballots, but we can't vote in person. And disregard all the coincidences surrounding this election, from Black Lives Matter showing up close to the election, which we also predicted, to the virus, which forced that party to push a mail-in system that opens up all sorts of problems like this. I mean, coronavirus delays. And what's taking so long to do something the rest of the country's already done? Let's rewind and revisit La Resistance early on in Trump's term. To every single accusation they've drummed up, all coincidences because he's such a threat to our country and democracy. Remember, he's a dictator who wouldn't send the National Guard to the Democrat-led riot states until they asked him to. But they didn't ask him to. Well, a dictator would simply do it and not adhere to the 10th Amendment, which calls for governors to run their states and request federal assistance. But those governors wouldn't ask for help with the riots. Our brainiac governor did nothing and let the rioters run roughshod. I bet he would have done something if the rioters and looters would have been conservatives, but you really don't see many conservatives do things like that. Oh, he was reelected, by the way. Shows just how not smart we're getting, even after risking the entire Washington apple crop by illegally sending maggot-infested apples to eastern Washington. That must have been Trump's fault too, just like the riots. But they say he's destroying the Constitution, even though it's not Trump who wants to remove the First, Second, and 12th Amendments right out of the gate. But he's a dictator, like they said, a threat who gave us a good economy, record low unemployment, historic lows for minorities. Not bad for such a racist, huh? And we were supposed to be at war too, since the DC swamp said he would create World War III. Everything they said would happen never happened. Now, I'm sure people will come up with some sort of excuse. Can toxic people not accuse others without evidence simply because they don't like a person? I doubt it. Now, we can talk about H1N1 and the differences between that and this COVID scam. First, you say H1N1 isn't as bad, so comparing it to Barack's death count isn't the same. But at the same time, say it's far worse, so it requires lockdowns and masks to hide from something you can't hide from. So which is it? Worse or not worse? You can't have it both ways. Scientists even said we couldn't stop COVID, but maybe slow it down while estimating 2.2 million deaths in the country. Avoided that, but we can't applaud Trump for any of it. Just the deaths we do have, which are primarily older people with previous health issues. He lied about the virus. What exactly did he lie about? Now, there's a difference between lying and keeping calm by playing something down. What information was withheld? What lies were told? Don't make optimism fit your narrow, toxic views because you're trying to fuel your narrative. I've noticed that whenever he would say something something optimistically or hopeful, the press would headline it as fact that he said what happened. There's a reason why the press aren't real journalists anymore and why big tech suppresses information, and you're led to believe it's for your protection because, like some horses, you need blinders put on your eyes so you only see the direction they want you to see. Nobody finds it strange that half the country is begging for the corrupt career politicians that have a history of lying and deceit to run things again, because according to those same politicians, our current president is such a threat to the world. Yeah, we can't have peace deals, no way. And due to their supporters' self-esteem issues and ego problems, they don't like a guy because he doesn't sugarcoat things involving a polluted and corrupt political system that's been going on since long before he came around. But suddenly those toxic people are begging for the career politicians to take over? Nothing weird about that? Oh, wait, no. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I've found similarities between the plandemic panic pushers and never-Trumpers. Most are one and the same. You don't have a problem throwing around COVID deaths, but what about normal flu deaths, cancer deaths? I suppose those are Trump's fault too, because he didn't want to freak you out. Speaking of not wanting to create panic, look at how you handled toilet paper early on. Don't dare try to hold Obama accountable for all the H1N1 deaths. But I digress. So many double standards and coincidences that toxic people refuse to acknowledge. How many coincidences does it take before you smell a rat? Because the Washington, D.C. swamp has been infested with them for years, until Donald Trump showed up, and now he's the only rat, and the rest of D.C. are honest, truthful, and are out to fight corruption. But for those of us who've done hundreds of hours of research beyond the scope of Google and Facebook, we're the ones who have it wrong, not the folks who get all their information on their cell phone from sources controlled by 6 corporations. If the press did their jobs as fact-checkers, we wouldn't need to outsource it to people who weren't good enough to get a job in journalism, so they give themselves titles as fact-checkers, which, like Politico, are simply left-wing propaganda outlets. Actually, if the press did their jobs right, we wouldn't be in the position we're in right now. But many of us saw this coming, and we said so. Many of us can smell deceit a mile away, mostly because we've been screwed over so many times by people we're supposed to trust. Let's talk about the press, big tech, and the DC swamp. First, you have the mainstream press. Trust levels are at all-time lows. They've been caught pushing narratives and opinions as news to such an extent that outside bias groups called fact-checkers are now pretending to be something the press should be. Next, we have big tech, who's been studying your behavior patterns for the last decade. They've been caught mishandling personal data, and they've been caught suppressing information that conflicts with the narrative they've been pushing. We have the DC swamp, who are famous for being lying career politicians, and in the last 20 or so years have implemented tactics like projection and transference into their agendas. And all three groups supporting the same person, that person who was 1 week from dropping out during the DNC race and was losing the night before, but a few states stopped counting for reasons, and magically he got ahead after a non-common mail-in process heavily pushed by that same swamp that despises the one running against their guy, and for the first time in recent history made all these changes to the cycle after this postponement that has never happened before from a voting process never used before. So what sounds more realistic? Mass manipulation by them in a collective effort, or mass manipulation by a real estate businessman who was loved by most until he became a politician? I think this may be an exception to Occam's razor. And if Biden wins, and why wouldn't he? His party only got caught cheating in the 2016 DNC primary. Why don't you think they wouldn't try again? I think conservatives and Republicans should do to him what Trump's toxic opposition put him through, every single thing. It would be hard since the press and big tech are obvious tools for his party agenda. But if that were to happen, I bet they would say things like, you really should support your president no matter who it is, just like they did, right? When the president helped with that Middle East peace deal, Nancy Pelosi called it a distraction. I noticed when he would do anything he promised to do or something that helped our country, she would call it a distraction from their latest accusations. Accusations that started even before he became president. They were accusing him of something, or whenever he would expose just how corrupt they are, because we've known it for years. The toxic would call it a distraction. I understand Pelosi's party has difficulties comprehending what fulfilling a campaign promise means since it's so foreign to them, and it might be confusing to the naive and easily manipulated because it's been so long since any campaign promises have ever been fulfilled in prior administrations. They don't know what it looks like. Of course they're going to be afraid of the unknown. It happens to be so foreign, I'm surprised they haven't tried to make a victim group out of it to pander for more votes. People demanding protection from Mother Nature by power-hungry, very flawed humans under the guise of safety and saving lives will be the cause of more harm than good. But since they have all the answers, They know that.
We are a nation that has a government, not the other way around. And this makes us special among the nations of the earth. Our government has no power except that granted it by the people. It is time to check and reverse the growth of government, which shows signs of having grown beyond the consent of the governed. We suffer from the longest and one of the worst sustained inflations in our national history. It distorts our economic decisions, penalizes thrift, and crushes the struggling young and the fixed income elderly alike. It threatens to shatter the lives of millions of our people. Idle industries have cast workers into unemployment, human misery, and personal indignity. Those who do work are denied a fair return for their labor by a tax system which penalizes successful achievement and keeps us from maintaining full productivity. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. You can see heroes every day going in and out of factory gates. Others, a handful in number, produce enough food to feed all of us and then the world beyond. You meet heroes across a counter, and they're on both sides of that counter. There are entrepreneurs with faith in themselves and faith in an idea who create new jobs, new wealth, and opportunity. They're individuals and families who take taxes support the government and whose voluntary gifts support church, charity, culture, art, and education. Their patriotism is quiet but deep. Their values sustain our national life.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed effort.
Good thing we're all victims now. And just remember, stay afraid. I don't know. Just call it how I see it.